we are live. Welcome to episode 8 of Portfolio Talks. We are super excited to have the full team is here. And then we also have a new addition, not a new addition for us, but a new addition for the audience. We work very closely with Amin and all the great lawyers at Alliance Lawyers LLP for pretty much everything that we do. They're always our Superman in the background that comes in, swoops in, and talks about everything legal related. So very excited to have them here to share some information with you. So Amin, I will pass off to you. Let the listeners know who is Amin, who is Alliance, and let us know all these things about this beautiful man down here in the suit.
Thanks, Vishal. Yeah, my name is Amin Oberoi. I'm one of the partners at Alliance Lawyers, small boutique firm, full service. We operate our brick and mortar at Langley, but we really service clients all over Canada, all over British Columbia, and in other parts of the world as well. We primarily focus on helping professionals navigate corporate matters, whether that's the setting up corporations, dealing with their accountants, and then obviously sometimes litigation happens as well. So that is the bread and butter of our practice, and that's what we do.
Fantastic. Aman, tell us about, people know what lawyers are on TV, but like really when it comes down to it, your role is to protect your clients. Is that not really what you would say?
Yeah, we prefer to help people or help
Yeah.
professionals and corporations early on in the game. So the better advice we can give up front before, things hit the fan, the better. Because lawyers get very, very expensive when we're tasked to handle litigation type matters. When you're in the middle of a lawsuit, it's too late. So it's better to have a proper structure. It's better to have a proper grounding on a game plan prior to putting yourself in a situation where liability might ensue. So yeah, you're right, Mike. It's always better to have a lawyer involved to help in the planning stages. And you'll notice that, again, the cost. I keep bringing this up. I brought it up like 3 times. We've only been on for like 3 minutes. It's really expensive to have lawyers involved. And it's our hourly rates are crazy. I mean, what other professionals charge starting 300 all the way up to like $3,000 an hour. It's very, very expensive. So again, having a lawyer earlier on in your business strategies is I think a better tool to have in your kit, and you'll save money in the long run, hopefully.
Love it. I think Mike said a really great metaphor before we jumped on and was like, people don't really set up the foundation right in the beginning. They build the house and then they have to go back retroactively and try and fix the foundation when it comes time for a transaction. So if you guys are watching, the whole point of Portfolio Talks, it was born to really provide financial conversations to those of you who operate in silos. So if you're watching this, you might be at your clinic, in the middle of a shift and be like, I just need to know kind of what's going on. And yeah, you get to hear our great voices talk to you and stuff like that, but you're also going to get some knowledge when it comes to all the things that you need to know and conversations you should be having around you. But people operate in silos, so you don't really get that. So we're here to tell you it's better to do a strong foundation, to Amit's point. Bring a lawyer in the very beginning because it's cheap, and think of it like you're getting them at a discounted rate because you really are. When it comes to litigation, you're spending $3,000 an hour, but when it comes to planning, maybe it's $500 an hour. So you're really getting them at a discount in the beginning to make sure that as you grow, you're not going to be falling into the pit traps and things that people usually do. Because we see all the time when it comes time for, and we'll talk about the example, but when it comes time for people to sell their business, when we look and peel back the layers, their share structure or the corporate structure is not correct when it comes to them wanting to sell their practice or their business or retire. It's not structured appropriately, and then you have to go all the way back to the beginning, and it's chaotic. So a couple things I want to ask, actually. I didn't even prep you for this, so
All good. Go ahead.
I apologize, but minutes books. People talk about minute books all the time. Like, what is a minute book? Why do you need to have it for your corporation? Does it need to be done annually, and why?
So a minute book is the body of the corporation. It's all of the, as lawyers call, constating documents. Those are the documents that initiate a corporation, and then all of the annual maintenance. So if you have a BC registered company, every year you have to basically send in a form to the corporate registry and say, you sign off and say, yep, the company is in good standing and we want to continue for another year. If you go 2 years and not do that, the company will die. You can always revive it, but it's expensive. Why do that? So that's the yearly maintenance part. Minute book, again, is the body of the corporation. So all of the corporate resolutions need to be in there. As a matter of practice or preference, some lawyers or some accountants think that the financial statements also need to be in there. Some do it in practice, some don't. But in any event, it's just a binder. It's the body of the corporation, and it needs to be held somewhere. I say it should be held at a lawyer's office. Some, shareholders or directors of companies like to have the book at their house. That's fine. One of the interesting things is if a minute book is not kept in proper condition, and a company grows older and older and older, and if that company wants to borrow funds from a bank, one of the conditions that you always see from an A lender, whether that's TD or RBC or Van City or Coast Capital or any other bank, is the book needs to be in a certain state. So they'll have the lawyer sign an opinion letter saying, I'm a lawyer, I've looked at the minute book, it's in proper condition to have funding happen on this transaction. A lawyer's not going to sign their name unless the book actually is in proper condition. We had an example where there was a 30-year-old company recently, and the book was not in proper state. And in order to get the funding, we had to have like 3 team members at the firm spend 7 days to get the book in a certain state. That's like $50,000 in legal work to have like 3 lawyers or 3 staff. Like, it's a lot of work. Whereas if the book was kept in proper state from the beginning, it's like different firms charge different amounts to maintain a book. I charge about $500, but some lawyers in the office charge about $300 a year. So if you just multiply 300 over 30 years, it's not 50 grand. So, I mean, because the law firm has to apply considerable resources, and there's a premium to be charged to fix a book. That's that old. That's an extreme example, but it's an example nonetheless, and it's a true story. So keep your books in good working order. Keep it at a lawyer's office. There's lots of good lawyers around. You should expect to pay between $200 to $1,000 a year for corporate maintenance.
Let's go back a little bit. Just explain on a 101 level.
Sure.
Why would somebody incorporate? What's the point of the corporation?
Lots of different reasons to incorporate from a tax perspective. And again, I'm not a tax specialist, but being in this field, you have to, know how to flag issues. But just from a tax perspective, it allows, if it's a closely held corporation, like for instance, a doctor. If a doctor is practicing as a doctor, they're going to be making income through that practice. And, if they draw all that money into their personal bank account, they might make enough money where they don't need to use all that money. Why not park that money in a corporation, a corporate entity, and then just draw out income as the doctor or as the doctor's accountant sees fit? So there's a tax strategy around why one would incorporate. There's also a liability aspect, and that's the legal aspect, is a corporation under the laws of British Columbia and even the laws of Canada and even in the States, most Western countries, a corporation is seen as a separate entity under law. So when you incorporate a company, you've given birth to a person basically. And so if I'm operating a law practice and I have a corporation, even though I've got insurance, it adds an extra layer of protection from liability. So you might amass wealth over time. You might buy a personal residence. Having a corporation between your business activities and your personal activities creates a layer of protection. Now, it's not an ultimate layer of protection, and we can get into the nitty gritty because, I'm a litigator by trade. So there are ways to, what we say, pierce the corporate veil. So if someone is operating through a corporation and they commit fraud, which is an intentional type of contravention under the laws, then your corporation's not going to help you. But if you're just doing standard business stuff, whether you own a trucking company or a dental office or an eyeglass clinic or a mortgage brokerage or portfolio planning, it creates a layer of tax efficiency, which is good. And it also creates a layer of liability protection.
I think
I've never heard it structured that way. That's really cool.
It's great, but it also kind of explains that it's like a living thing. So that's
Yep.
why every year you have to kind of do some maintenance and keep it up to date. And it isn't free, but it's cheaper generally, I think, than the other way, which is paying through the nose for taxes. And you're basically paying tax on everything, like you said, as opposed to drawing out dividends that we're not all accountants here. None of us are, so we won't get into it too far. But yeah, in general, it's efficient. So I think that's really important for us to understand starting off. That's the reasoning. I love the way you put that. There's some issues with. I don't think we need to get into too deep in the weeds there. But
Yeah.
Vishal, do you think, like, when from a planning point of view from your side, how do you guys like to see those things set up? Like earlier or later, or when do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on there's nuances to everything, especially on our side of the business. So, we work with, well, a good financial planner, which truthfully, there aren't that many out there. Like, there's a lot of financial planners, not that many good ones, because a lot of them are just, I'm a financial planner, but I'm going to manage your investments, and that's basically it. But for us, when it comes to helping guide their future, we have to work closely with the lawyers and the accountants and the brokers and all the other professionals. So there's a lot of nuances, and it depends what their goals are. For example, if there's a client who has a lot of money, let's use the same example that Amin said. There's a dentist, I believe you mentioned, that earns a lot of money personally, and they don't need all that money. You know, general rule of thumb is if you're spending less than you're earning, or sorry, if you're, yeah, spending less than you're earning, just incorporate and instead. And the corporation, in fact, acts like an RSP. Because I think a lot of people understand RSPs more than they understand corporations. So the whole purpose of an RSP is you can control your income and you can pay yourself and kind of blend out your taxes as opposed to having huge lump sums at once. Put the leftover in like a piggy bank, which is your RSP, which is actually your corporation, and then you can pay yourself whatever you need. So if you're, a female dentist and you're going to go on mat leave, now you can, fund your own mat leave from the retained earnings or extra money that's in your corporation. But, a lot of people just stop there. What we really look at is what kind of goals do you have right now? So if you're someone who's in the first few years of working and you still have a lot of student loans and, interest rates are crazy right now. So, you're paying 8% interest on this line of credit, that's your student loan. It might make sense because that's a risk-free rate of return. So without you taking any market risk or potentials for losses, if you're paying off that loan, you're getting an 8% return. So you're kind of like investing your money. So in that case, even if you did incorporate, we would recommend that you're pulling all that money out anyways to pay off this line of credit. So in that case, it doesn't really make sense for you to incorporate because you're gonna have to pay corporate fees, extra accounting fees, minute book fees, all this other stuff for you just to pull the money out anyways. That really doesn't make much sense. Maybe you're someone who's trying to buy a first home, so we can still reduce your taxes by filling up your FHSA, filling up your RSP, and then it still doesn't make sense for you to incorporate and incur those extra fees when you can leave that money personally, mitigate your taxes by taking advantage of the Income Tax Act, and then pull that money out for a first-time home, and then you can incorporate later on. So it really depends on what the goals are for the client, but you don't need to know it all yourself. You just need to know enough to ask for help, and that's kind of what we all would do is coordinate and talk and figure out what makes the most sense for you.
So, Amin, maybe to that point, I mean, let's face it, doctors and dentists and any kind of professional can get into some trouble, whether through their own, fault or not. Talk about that and what the corporation does to protect them.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk for hours on that. That really gets into the nature of what we say cause of action. That's what lawyers say for the lawsuit or the reason for the claim. So a common one that happens across businesses, whether you're operating a dental clinic or a medical clinic or an optometrist clinic or an accounting office or a trucking office, is employment disputes. Happens all the time. So an employment dispute is, most commonly, as we see, an employee being disgruntled or an employee being let go, and then the employee makes a claim in one of the three avenues that are available to them in British Columbia. So that's the Human Rights Tribunal, that's the Employment Standards Tribunal, and that's just the common law, Supreme Court or provincial court. So lawsuits like that will generally only be applicable to the corporation. So you have a doctor or you have someone who owns a trucking company, and the main owner, if you will, operates their business through the corporation. And so if there's a squabble with an employee, that employee, unless the owner has done something of intentional nature, let's say there's some sort of a sexual type of aspect to it, then the owner can be sued directly. But if it's standard, you didn't pay me my vacation pay, or you didn't give me proper severance when you let me go, or the manager was being mean to me, and as a result, you shouldn't have let me go, you let him go, so the company owes me money. In a situation like that, the corporation is exposed to liability from the employee or the departed employee, not the owner. So that's and that situation would apply to a dentist, that situation would apply to a doctor or any other corporation, really. So if it's employment related and it's a clean kind of situation, then the corporation would be exposed to liability, and the shareholder or the director in most situations would be shielded from liability as well. The other interesting thing that comes up from time to time is, let's say that employer is liable. Let's say a court finds the employer liable. What happens if there's no money in the corporation? It's very hard, if there's no money in a corporation, for a successful plaintiff to collect dollar for dollar on their judgment. They might be able to get a payment plan out. They might have to leave a few dollars on the table. And that's an important thing to know. And that really speaks to the veracity of shielding liability between the corporation and the shareholders and directors. And again, I do have to say there's a caveat, and that is generally where there's an intentional harm that happened. So if the director or the shareholders have done something intentional that's of a fraudulent nature, then the corporation won't shield them in most situations. But in standard, liabilities that happen in a workplace, the corporation does shield.
I think one thing that's important, and that's perfectly said, there's a lot of different ways that things can happen and you can get offside. So if you're someone who is not incorporated and you're someone who is, married, or you have a common law and you have joint assets personally. So let's say it's you, your spouse, you guys have your family home, you have an investment property, you have your RSPs and TFSAs and all that stuff, and it's all personal, you're not incorporated, and all your income is there. You really are not only not protecting yourself, but you're not protecting your significant other as well, because their assets, because your name is on it, they're also attached to that. So if I sue somebody for whatever that reason may be, if they're not incorporated, all their assets are together under their name, not a separate entity like a corporation. If I win and I can get money from all that, and it doesn't matter whose asset it is, who put money into whatever it is, your name's on it. I can get to it, and that's really concerning thing that I don't think a lot of people know
about. One more kind of extension of that point is, I don't know how technical we want to get with things, but there's this creature of statute, we call it a CPL, a certificate of pending litigation. It's a lien that can be applied on a property, and it essentially freezes a property. If someone wants to refinance and there's a CPL on their property, the bank's not going to do it usually. There's certain securities or certain money that needs to be posted. Sometimes the bank won't even accept that. No further registrations can happen when there's a CPL on title unless there's permission given by, a registrar or court. So the interesting thing is, a CPL is, if there's a plaintiff who's advancing a claim against a defendant, they would generally apply a CPL where the money they're suing for on a breach of contract, let's say, is traceable to the property. So there's essentially saying, one example would be, I gave this person money, or I gave this company money. I know that money went into the property, so I'm freezing I'm putting a lien on the property. A CPL is a lien. And so I think if you have a corporation, it adds one extra layer of complexity for a plaintiff to assert or to show that money they gave the corporation went to the personal shareholder's house. So, even if you're starting out in a business, not even from a tax perspective, I think it's very important that if you're dealing with a lot of transactions and you're dealing with money, you should incorporate because of this liability thing. You might have a house with your wife or with your husband or with other family members, and you are exposing that house, even if it's a primary residence, to a potential certificate of pending litigation or a lien in a very easy way. If you're not incorporated, you're taking money from Peter, you don't pay Peter back. Peter might, hire a lawyer and put a CPL on your house, and now you're causing all sorts of other interpersonal issues with other co-owners of the home. Happens a lot. And in practice, if there are corporations between the individuals, it's a lot harder to assert a certificate of pending litigation.
It's crazy. We'd actually just had, Amr and I had a joint client that worked on a file, and they were trying to close on a new build, pre-con condo, and there was a CPL or a lien on the building, so they couldn't even complete because the developer had some litigation against them, which was crazy. That's the first time I've seen that.
No, I know, and we're really getting into the weeds of like what lawyers in litigation do. Like a CPL is something that maybe a non-lawyer, whether you're a professional or not, just a non-lawyer doesn't understand the degree to which that's like, it's such a powerful tool, and it's often used as leverage, and you're not supposed to use it as leverage, but in practice it is. You put a lien on a property, what's that person going to do? They're going to either have to go to court, spend 20, 30,000 bucks to get that taken off. Judge might not even agree, or what most recipients of a CPL on their property, what they do is they just post money in trust. So it's the more you can mitigate that sort of liability being applied at minimum to your primary residence, if you own it, it needs to be done. I mean, what's $200-300 a year?
Let's go back. You just brought up something I think we should even touch on too. It's just contracts in general. I mean, we literally sign contracts online all day long. All of us do. And most of us don't even read them. And it's terrifying to think what could be in there and what you're signing up for. And especially as a new professional or a younger person that's making some nice income and everything looks rosy, but by signing the wrong contract, they can really screw themselves. So do you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's different types of contracts, right? Like, for instance, you're trying to get a mortgage, you go to TD, they say, okay, I'm going to send you the package DocuSign. Most people don't read those things.
Yeah.
And most of those security packages, even if it's, a credit card, they'll have a general security term in there, and it applies to your credit. So my advice is read everything, do your best to read everything, do your best to understand everything. I would say get legal advice, but it's not practical to get legal advice on everything. But we have so many tools at our disposal. You could learn how to read contracts. You could learn standard contract law. It's all available online, whether you go through Google or Canly. It's like anything else. It's like the WebMD thing. Is WebMD replacing doctors right now? No, but it's not. It gives people the power to at least do some research on different sorts of maladies. Contract law is no different. So my advice or my suggestion is get a lawyer involved whenever you can. But if you can't, I mean, there's. I was going to say ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is horrendous when it comes to legal stuff. I think ChatGPT and AI software is very good for putting together letters once your inputs are proper. And I'm kind of straying off a little bit, but there is some AI software available for lawyers, where if it was available to the public, and I think it is, you'd be able to learn a lot more about contract law, what you're looking for, what the terms mean.
Educate yourself, right? I mean, that's really what you're saying.
I guess that's a long way. Us lawyers charge by the word, right? So that's a long-winded way of saying educate yourself.
But I do think to that point, I mean, you're right. You're never going to have a lawyer look at everything you sign there all day long. But I think for young professionals thinking about entering into employment or those kind of situations, even buying a property, like I'm shocked how few people talk to a lawyer before they buy the property, and especially new properties. But to me, employment, that's super important. I mean, what are you tying yourself into? Are there ways to get out? Those kind of things. I mean, that's really important.
Yeah,
stuff.
and we're getting to an interesting topic. Realtors get paid a percentage. So the home buyer doesn't really, they're not cutting a check to their realtor. It's all done through the brokerages. Brokers are the same way in most situations, right? I mean, obviously there's some situations where you know, get a fee for service separate. I know Vishal's um, service is similar to ours in some regards. It's a quasi, I believe, system, but you know, people don't want to generally, I'm talking about the general population, not talking about people who are savvy and buying and selling properties. Folks like that have lawyers on retainer. We represent lots of those folks, but it doesn't cost much, a couple $100 to have a lawyer look at a contract. You know, I've had lots of situations where, you know, I've got a realtor colleague who says, hey, can you take a look at this contract? And a lot of times, if I have a good relationship with the realtor, like we don't charge for that. I mean, it's fine, right? Especially if the conveyance is coming through our office. I don't do conveyancing, but my business partners do. But it's kind of like a service thing. You know, we want to make sure if we're going to be handling a file, we want to make sure it comes to us in a good state as well. So it doesn't cost much for people to get some legal advice on a contract, or even your realtor. If your realtor has a good contact with a lawyer, try to somehow get the lawyer involved earlier on, and maybe the realtor can just, yeah, you know, take that out of the realtor's commission, or maybe you pay the lawyer $400 or $500, a couple $100. It's not much in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Property's so expensive, right? I mean, what's a couple $100?
Yeah.
100%. It's nothing. Um, I know we are semi running out of time, so I want to get one important question in there. Um, but there's before that, I just want to clarify something that maybe I'm, misunderstanding. But if there's a dentist that's watching this, for example, and they want to get ready to buy a clinic, one
Yeah.
thing that can really hurt them in buying that clinic would be if they don't have their minute book in place. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. With professionals, the acquisition and sale process is considerably different from non-professionals
Hmm.
because there's an added layer of complexity, which is the regulatory body. So, you know, for instance, for a physician, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC, the dental college as well. Law firms are the same way. We've got the regulator, accountants are the same way. And so the regulators in each of these professions have certain requirements when acquiring or selling a business. But the minute book for financing, you were saying for a dentist, yeah, 100%. If you're going to be using financing, and dentists get very aggressive financing, as we all know, in
Yeah.
our professions, which is very good for them. That's why you see a lot of successful dentists, to be honest, is they get very good financing deals because it's a good business. If the minute book's not in order, the bank's not going to give you money and you won't be able to close. And if you're not able to close and you're just committing to closing, you expose yourself to liability, considerable liability for breaching contracts. And yeah, it's not a good thing. So for professionals more than anyone, I strongly advise for a lawyer to be taking care of your minute book. Even the incorporation process is different for professionals. We have to
Yeah.
keep the regulatory body on board. There's special provisions for each of the professions regarding the constating documents. So like the articles, there have to be certain terms in there for voting rights. Generally for all of the professional, jobs and occupations, the voting rights have to be held by a practicing registrant. So a lot of times there's spouses who are on corporations for certain efficiencies. Those spouses can, if they're not a registrant in that occupation or in that profession, they are not allowed to be voting shareholders for most professionals. So what I'm trying to say is it gets complicated with professionals. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. It's a process. But yeah.
Love it. I think that's gonna be a good snippet for sure. One thing I would feel bad if we didn't get it in there, because I know the vast majority of our audience, especially the students, when we speak at these conferences and events, they always have this question:
Yeah.
prenups.
Oh.
So can we just briefly speak on prenups?
Yeah.
How does it benefit you? How does it help you? What's not protected? Let's say there's a physician who ends up marrying somebody and they end up getting divorced. What does the prenup even do for you in
Right.
BC, for example?
So if you talk to 10 lawyers, you'll get 10 different types of advice.
Yeah.
I'm of the belief, based on the knowledge I have, I've done a lot of trial work. I've gone to court lots in my career. I've been a lawyer almost 10 years now. So, and I've had a pretty fast-paced career. So it's my general belief that the longer you stay together with your spouse, if you don't update the prenup, it's the longer you're together, the less power it has. For a shorter relation, and I say shorter as, I mean, even 10 years is 10 years isn't long, it's not short, but like even a 10-year relationship, I think a prenup in most situations, depending on how the parties have changed assets over time, it'll work. But if you're in a 30-year marriage, a prenup you signed in 1988, it's probably not going to be worth much.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So as you progress over time, unless you update these prenups, they're not going to be worth much. But I still think in situations where one spouse or both spouses come into a relationship together, it's a good idea to have a prenup, unless you don't care.
And what does the prenup do for those that
Yeah,
don't have any idea?
Sure. A prenup sets out what happens to certain assets should the relationship or marriage fall apart. So if you get together, you live together in a common law situation or in a marriage, the prenup will dictate, or the purpose of a prenup is, it'll dictate what happens if you split up. But there's so many complications with how parties may transfer assets. For instance, you might have a prenup that says Timmy's coming into the relationship with the house located at this, and Tommy is coming into the relationship with a very expensive yacht. But what happens and you know, if they separate, Timmy gets his house, Tommy gets his yacht. But what happens if throughout the relationship before separation, you know, Timmy puts Tommy on registration and Tommy puts Timmy on registration over here, and then, you know, unless the prenup addresses that, it can create some complications. So it needs to be properly drafted and thought out. Yeah.
I think just to cover that, I mean, like we always talk about, I hate sounding a broken record, but it's always about planning, right? If you have a plan and you protect yourself as much as you can, but it's in the end, I mean, it may not follow the path you think it's going to follow, but at least you're trying to protect yourself as best you can.
Well, it's about planning. That's what a cohabitation or a prenup is. It's about setting a plan down, and it starts a conversation too. Like some folks say, we're getting into this marriage, and if we split up, it's going to be 50-50, and that's fine. That's what the general starting point of the law is. Other folks say, well, no, I inherited all this stuff. We want to make sure that the next generation gets it, or if this relationship doesn't work out, I get to retain it. So it's about thinking about how you want to live your life, how you want to plan, and it forces couples, I think going back to the prenup, forces couples to have difficult conversations up front. And that's an important part of planning. You gotta deal with difficult potential issues up front. That's the only way to get a good plan going. You don't have a good plan, as you guys know better than I do probably, with pretending certain issues might not exist.
How involved do you get in the personal stuff before you get to the documentation?
That depends on the clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. That depends on the clients. Like some clients are very, very sophisticated, so they know, they've discussed all of these things before they've come to the lawyers, and they've done the proper research. And those sorts of clients, we don't have to get into too much, other than financial disclosure. Other clients come to us and say, I've heard of a prenup, don't know what it is, explain it. And then those sorts of situations require a lot more invasive surgery, if you will.
Awesome.
I think it's going to be a really good point for another episode, definitely, when you have you back, to go more in depth about situations like, all right, let's say someone was gifted money, use that for a down payment, because generally speaking, inheritance and insurance benefits are not divided upon a breakup. But what if you interconnect that stuff? Like, what if you got an inheritance, use it to buy your home, now it's a family home, you refinanced it, lent money to your significant other to start a business? Like, what is going on? So there's so many situations that can be complicated. So I think we would love to spend more time on that in another episode. And also, for those of you who are watching this, especially those that are going to be in professional practice, like physicians, like dentists, like optometrists, getting into contract law, especially physicians, you guys get to take advantage of a lot from pharmacists potentially sometimes. We want to make sure that, I don't know if I should have said that actually, but maybe you don't, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But
I think it's the other way around. I think
Honestly, it could be.
I think the
I-
pharmacists are being taken advantage of by the physicians.
yeah, we actually have seen.
I'm just joking.
It's honestly it's a crazy thing. So and I don't think any of it is malicious. I just think both of those professions don't have any experience really with setting up contracts, and it's just kind of cookie cutter boilerplate stuff, and then they
Yeah.
sign it, and then it almost always has issues later on. And that's the unfortunate part is the physician and the pharmacist get along in the beginning well, starting really, really well for business, and then things fall apart because it wasn't done appropriately in the beginning. So Amin and I were talking about this before. We're thinking about doing some live events about this kind of stuff with all of us as a team to be like, come in, we're going to teach you about this specific stuff, which would be like contract law, how to protect yourself. I know there's a couple associations that want us to come in there and talk to them about that as well. But before we jump off, I just want to say thank you to all four of you, or
Thanks,
sorry,
guys.
all three of you. I'm the fourth one. I want to say
Oh, you're
thank
thanking
you.
yourself. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm thanking myself. As a financial planner, I saw the number and I was like, I'm going with 4. But I'm wearing this, and I just wanted to say thank you to the three of you for helping put on such a great event. We will have content dropped about this, but just last week we hosted an event that is the second year we've done it, and the whole point of it was to provide a platform to teach the next generation of physicians at UBC how to make their career as lucrative as possible. So we had over 70 attendees came together. Some were residents, some were practicing physicians, but a lot of them were medical students. And it was a conference hosted at the Abbotsford Hospital, showed them some real life experience, getting their hands dirty so that, you know, the theory work that they go to school with is a little bit easier as they get an idea of what they want to do when it comes to specialization. Then we had a social hour, had a lot of great conversations, had a lot of great questions, and we'll be doing some follow up with everyone there. But thank you, Mike. Thank you, Amin. Thank you, Tyson. You all made the experience very, very enjoyable, and the feedback has been incredible. And everyone's just excited for the third year. And you heard it here first. We're gonna be back for year 3. Same team, run it back. It's gonna be fantastic. But thank you very, very much, everyone.